question would be, first of all, thank you for the what are the political consequences of inequality? I think that you very well showed the processes in which inequality increased for the last few decades. We've seen maybe some protest movements in Europe, partly in the US to extent. So what ways will the politics sort of react to this, and what would have to be done in terms of the financial reform, or in terms of economic policy? Here you hear the proposals about another New Deal, creating jobs, reducing unemployment. What do you think would be the policy proposals to sort of counteract?
Well, first of all, political implications, of course, are all through this. It's a highly politicized topic, but I think they were expressed immortally, and it cannot be improved upon by Adam Smith early in the Wealth Commissions, where there's this one sentence I can never tire of. It's, wealth, as Mr. Hobbes says, is power. As Mr. Hobbes says, this three-word sentence. I read that to a reporter the other day. He said, "You mean the nasty British in short, Mr. Hobbes?" And that, of course, to me, is the issue that one should be mostly concerned about. That this is a sign of an immense distortion in, let's say, the capacity to influence the course of government, which is an obvious fact that we all have lived with for many years now. There was, at least at one point, a sense that a democratic society had multiple poles of influence and sources of deliberation. But nowadays, we pay at the door. And that's something as a former congressional staffer I observed in very graphic ways. The most graphic way is my old hearing room, which is the House Banking Committee room in the Rayburn Building, 2129 Rayburn. When I worked there were 2 rows of desks for members. It was a respectable sized committee, probably had 30 or 40 members. Now it has well over 60. 4 rows of desks, practically no room for anybody else. Why? Well, because the leadership on both parties realized long ago that if you have a vulnerable sophomore and put them on the banking committee, the banks will fund them, and so they're political. They become much more politically secure than they were last year. And that's what the committee does. It's a fundraising operation, which to me is a disgrace. It says that members of Congress have fundamental flexibility to be for independent views on a whole range of things, but not banking issues. On banking issues, you take your marching orders from your bankers. What do you do about it? Well, I think the whole, again, this is something I've said many times, this would be a much easier issue to deal with if only Attorney General Holder were alive. That's a simple fix. If someone can find the on button in the Department of Justice and push it, that would be a good thing. You cannot legalize financial fraud. You can only overlook it, which is what they're doing. And what went on in the I would put the following, for larger interpretation of these events. I don't have an enormous objection to the technology movement. Certainly there was a lot of exuberance and a fair amount of fakery associated with it. People getting money who should never have gotten money. But the real estate debacle that followed it is something which should have been repressed aggressively. Because you had 2 kinds of loans that were being made. Loans being made to people who were never going to be able to repay them. And who were being forced to refinance so that their loans value would go up very rapidly and they would be foreclosed. This was victimization of very vulnerable people. This is the whole neighborhoods in places like Cleveland were wiped out. And people knew this. The Federal Reserve held hearings. Activist organizations came and talked to them. They listened politely and did nothing. That's, to me, a huge disgrace. And the other was, of course, the speculative building of housing that was being sold to people who didn't have enough money to move in. So when the banks came around and foreclosed, they were foreclosing on empty properties. Empty properties have a very low probability of paying mortgages. Policing the financial system requires that you have an effective autonomous police force. When was the last time we had that? In the early 1990s, savings and loan crisis. At that time, even under Reagan, even under Bush, and both of them had a lot of responsibility earlier for what happened, but they did allow, or empower, or at least not stop, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board from litigating, and the Department of Justice from prosecuting an enormous amount of outright fraud. About 1,000 people who were insiders in that industry in the early 1990s ended up in federal prison for good reason. Some big names like Charles Keating and Michael Milken, Don Dixon, very prominent in that group. And if you went to California or Arizona or Texas at the time, you know what I'm talking about. People who should never have been allowed. Basically were criminal elements who got control of large financial institutions. Something which, of course, could never happen again, could it?